The Zelithian Empire's grand diplomatic arena possessed all the architectural subtlety of a death metal concert venue designed by committee. Towering obsidian walls stretched toward a ceiling that disappeared into artificial darkness, while holographic banners proclaimed various trade agreements in 17 different languages. Though notably, none of them mentioned the fine print about potential dismemberment. The floor, polished to mirror perfection, reflected the bemused faces of dignitaries, who had apparently missed the memo about bringing protective gear to a business meeting. Ambassador Chen adjusted her standard-issue diplomatic briefcase and wondered, not for the first time, why interstellar relations couldn't be conducted in a nice conference room with adequate climate control and complimentary pastries. Instead, she found herself standing in what appeared to be a coliseum crossed with a corporate boardroom, complete with stadium seating for an audience that seemed far too excited about paperwork. The Zelithian Trade Minister, a being whose multiple eyes blinked in sequence like a biological disco ball, gestured grandly toward the arena floor with appendages that seemed to have been borrowed from several different species. "Welcome, honored representative of the human collective, to our sacred halls of commercial negotiation." Sacred halls, because nothing said holy ground quite like the lingering scent of fear and what might have been alien blood. Though the cleaning crew had done their best with industrial-strength disinfectant. "I appreciate the warm reception," the human diplomat replied, setting down her briefcase with deliberate calm. "Though I must admit, your invitation mentioned standard trade protocols. This seems rather more theatrical than anticipated." A ripple of what might have been laughter, or possibly digestive distress, passed through the assembled alien dignitaries. The Corthanian representative, a creature resembling a cross between a praying mantis and a tax auditor, clicked its mandibles in apparent amusement. "Oh, this should be entertaining. The mammals always think they can negotiate without proving their worth first." The Zelithian minister's eyes performed another synchronized blink sequence. "Ah, forgive the confusion, dear ambassador. You see, the Zelithian Empire has maintained traditions in our diplomatic processes. We find that commerce flows more smoothly when all parties demonstrate their commitment to the relationship." "Commitment," the human repeated, glancing around the arena with the expression of someone who had just realized they'd walked into the wrong conference room. "And this demonstration involves combat trials, naturally." The minister's voice carried the cheerful enthusiasm of a game show host announcing the bonus round. "Nothing too strenuous, mind you. Simply a test of character, resolve, and survival instincts. Standard procedure for all new trading partners." The bureaucratic absurdity of the situation settled over the arena like a particularly dense fog. Here she was, armed with economic projections and mineral rights documentation, facing what appeared to be gladiatorial combat as a prerequisite for discussing shipping. The human collective's diplomatic academy had covered many scenarios, but fighting unknown aliens for trade agreements had somehow been omitted from the curriculum. "I see," she said, because diplomatic training had taught her that acknowledging insanity was often the first step toward managing it. "And what exactly does this trial involve?" The minister's eyes practically gleamed with anticipation. "Oh, nothing too complex. We simply release one of us associates into the arena with you. If you survive the encounter with dignity and tact, we consider you worthy of our respect and partnership. If not, well..." The being made a gesture that was probably meant to be reassuring but looked more like someone miming the act of being eaten. Around the arena, alien dignitaries leaned forward in their seats, some pulling out what appeared to be recording devices, while others began placing bets with the enthusiasm that suggested this was less rare than advertised. The human diplomat found herself wondering if her life insurance policy covered death by diplomatic procedure. "And if I were to decline this generous offer?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Oh, but you can." The minister's voice carried the bright tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child. "To refuse would be to insult our traditions, which would naturally void any possibility of future negotiation. Plus, you signed the preliminary agreement that included our standard diplomatic protocols clause." The human diplomat's expression remained perfectly neutral, though internally she was reviewing every word of the 17-page document she'd signed upon arrival. Clause 24-7. B had indeed mentioned traditional ceremonial requirements, but she'd assumed it referred to perhaps a formal dinner or cultural exchange, not trial by combat. "I understand," she said, because what else was there to say? "And what manner of associate should I expect to encounter?" The minister's multiple eyes performed what might have been a wink, though with that many optical organs involved, it was hard to tell. That would spoil the surprise. But I can tell you this, in the 300 years we've maintained this tradition, no being has ever walked away from an encounter with our Ravager Beast unchanged. The words hung in the air like a particularly ominous fortune cookie message. Around the arena, the alien audience settled into their seats with the satisfied air of spectators who had just been promised an exceptional show. Recording devices hummed to life, betting pools reached fevered pitches, and somewhere in the depths of the arena, something that sounded distinctly unfriendly began to howl. The human diplomat straightened her jacket, checked her watch, and wondered if she should have listened to her mother's advice about pursuing a career in accounting instead. At least spreadsheets rarely tried to eat you, though after dealing with quarterly reports, she wasn't entirely certain that facing an unknown alien creature couldn't possibly be worse. Very well, she said, because diplomatic protocol demanded grace under pressure, even when that pressure involved potential dismemberment. I accept your traditional requirements. When do we begin? The minister's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree having an epileptic fit. Immediately, guards, release the Ravager Beast. And somewhere in the bowels of the arena, ancient mechanisms began to grind to life, while the human diplomat wondered if her resume was current enough to be useful in whatever afterlife awaited failed diplomats. The show, as they say, was about to begin. The sound that emerged from the arena's depths suggested that somewhere, a heavy metal band was being devoured by a freight train with anger management issues. Ancient hydraulics wheezed and groaned as blast doors the size of small buildings began to retract, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb light rather than merely block it. The assembled alien dignitaries leaned forward with the eager anticipation of spectators at a particularly brutal sporting event, their various optical organs glinting with anticipation. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings, the minister announced through the arena's sound system, apparently having appointed himself as play-by-play commentator, I present to you the crown jewel of our diplomatic testing program, the Ravager Beast. What emerged from the shadows defied most conventional attempts at description, primarily because evolution had apparently been having a particularly creative day when it designed this particular nightmare. The creature stood roughly 12 feet tall at the shoulder, though its hunched posture suggested it could unfold to considerably greater heights if properly motivated. Its hide resembled armored plating crossed with volcanic rock, while multiple rows of teeth created a dental arrangement that would have made a great white shark file for unemployment benefits. The beast's eyes, all six of them, swept across the arena with the calculating intelligence of a predator that had never encountered a problem it couldn't solve through judicious application of violence. Muscles rippled beneath its chitinous exterior, as it tested the air with nostrils that flared like cave entrances, while claws the size of combat knives clicked against the polished floor with the sound of a typewriter, operated by someone with very aggressive opinions about punctuation. Magnificent, isn't it? The minister's voice carried the pride of a parent discussing their child's academic achievements. Native to the death worlds of the Zarian system, the Ravager Beast has proven remarkably effective at, shall we say, clarifying diplomatic position. Its last opponent, a rather presumptuous ambassador from the Centauri Federation, lasted nearly 4 minutes before requesting immediate evacuation. The alien audience murmured appreciatively, some taking notes while others adjusted their recording equipment for optimal carnage documentation. The Corthanian representative rubbed its mandibles together with what appeared to be gleeful anticipation. 4 minutes. Quite impressive. I give this human perhaps 90 seconds before the screaming begins. Perhaps, she said, speaking for the first time since the trial began, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. Your diplomatic protocols have been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what this creature actually is. The beast's head turned toward her voice, and in that moment, every alien observer witnessed something that would require extensive revision of their xenobiological textbooks. The creature's eyes held not the cold calculation of a predator, but the warm intelligence of a being that had been profoundly misunderstood for far too long. The human diplomat's hand came to rest on the creature's massive head, and the Ravager Beast, terror of 1,000 diplomatic negotiations, undefeated champion of bureaucratic violence, closed its eyes and leaned into the touch like an oversized pet, seeking affection. This is unprecedented. The minister's voice had dropped to a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the impossible scene unfolding before them. In 3 centuries of diplomatic trials, nothing like this has ever occurred. The beast is supposed to test worthiness through combat. No, whatever this is. The human diplomat looked up at the assembled alien dignitaries, her expression carrying the patient tolerance of someone explaining obvious facts to particularly slow students. Perhaps, she said, your tests have been measuring the wrong kind of worthiness all along. And in the center of the arena, the most feared creature in the Zelithian Empire's diplomatic arsenal rested beside a human diplomat like an oversized, heavily armored kitten, while the universe quietly revised several fundamental assumptions about the nature of strength and the power of simply paying attention to what others truly needed. The aftermath of witnessing the impossible possessed all the organized chaos of a bureaucratic meltdown conducted in 17 different languages simultaneously. Alien dignitaries sat in stunned silence, their various recording devices capturing footage that would require extensive disclaimers and possibly therapeutic counseling for future viewers. The minister's multiple eyes had stopped their synchronized blinking entirely, suggesting either profound contemplation or a complete system failure. So, the human diplomat said, settling more comfortably beside her new companion, who had somehow managed to arrange 12 feet of armored death into a position that could only be described as snuggling. Shall we discuss those trade agreements now? The question hung in the air like a diplomatic hand grenade with the pin already pulled. Around the arena, alien minds grappled with the fundamental reorganization of their understanding of reality, while their bureaucratic instincts struggled to determine which forms would need to be filed to properly document a complete paradigm shift. The minister finally managed, his voice carrying the shell-shocked tone of someone whose career had just been redefined by empirical evidence. The creature has never... The human diplomat replied, scratching behind what appeared to be the beast's equivalent of ears, causing a rumbling purr that resonated through the arena's foundations. That's actually quite a story. You see, before I entered diplomatic service, I spent 15 years working in xenobiology and comparative animal psychology. Fascinating field. Really, turns out most species, regardless of their evolutionary path, share certain fundamental emotional needs. The Corthanian representative's mandibles clicked frantically as it processed this information. But the beast is a weapon, a tool for diplomatic intimidation. It doesn't have emotional needs. It has dietary requirements and territorial imperatives. Does it? The human asked, her tone carrying the gentle patience of someone explaining basic facts to particularly confused students. Or have you simply been treating it like a weapon for so long that you forgot to notice it was actually a highly intelligent being with its own thoughts, feelings, and preferences? The creature in question chose that moment to demonstrate its intelligence by using one massive claw to carefully push the human's briefcase closer to her, apparently having decided that proper diplomatic seating arrangements were important for official business. The gesture was performed with such deliberate gentleness that it left several alien observers questioning everything they thought they knew about the nature of consciousness. This is unprecedented, muttered a delegate, whose species had apparently evolved from anxiety disorders given physical form. Our entire diplomatic framework is based on the assumption that strength equals worthiness, that survival of the fittest determines trading partnership. If the test can be passed through whatever this is. Empathy, the humans supplied helpfully. The word you're looking for is empathy, mixed with basic observation skills and a willingness to question assumptions. Remarkably effective diplomatic tools, actually. The minister's eyes performed what might have been the optical equivalent of a reboot sequence. But our traditions, 3 centuries of successful diplomatic intimidation, the entire foundation of our trading relationships, built on a misunderstanding, the human interrupted gently. Your weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's a highly intelligent being that's been forced to play the role of a monster for 300 years. Imagine how lonely that must have been. As if responding to her words, the creature nuzzled against the human's shoulder with a gentleness that sent ripples of cognitive dissonance through the watching alien. The sight of the galaxy's most feared diplomatic tool seeking comfort like an oversized pet was apparently causing several species to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about the nature of strength and power. The implications, whispered the Corthanian representative, its mandibles clicking in what might have been mathematical calculations, are staggering. If humans can neutralize our most effective diplomatic tool through simple kindness, what does that say about our entire approach to interstellar relations? It suggests, the human diplomat replied, opening her briefcase and pulling out a stack of trade agreements, that you might want to reconsider your methodology. After all, Wouldn't you prefer trading partners who choose to work with you because they trust and respect you rather than because they're afraid of being eaten? The question sparked a flurry of multilingual discussion among the alien delegates, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that sounded like a diplomatic orchestra tuning their instruments in 17 different keys. The concept of voluntary cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than intimidation was apparently requiring extensive processing power across multiple species cognitive. This changes everything, the minister said, his voice carrying the wonder of someone witnessing the birth of a new star. If diplomacy can be conducted through understanding rather than combat trials, if strength can be measured by the ability to connect rather than the capacity to survive, you'll need new protocols, the human agreed, scratching the creature's chin and earning another rumbling purr. New testing procedures, new evaluation criteria, new forms to file, probably new committees to oversee the transition. Bureaucracy adapts, eventually. The irony was not lost on anyone present that the human had just revolutionized galactic diplomacy, while simultaneously creating job security for thousands of bureaucrats across dozens of species. The universe, it seemed, maintained its sense of humor, even during paradigm shift. But what about the creature? Asked a delegate, whose species appeared to consist primarily of worry and insufficient sleep. What happens to our diplomatic, our friend, now that its true nature has been revealed? The human diplomat looked down at the massive head resting against her shoulder, and for the first time since entering the arena, she smiled. Well, that depends. How would you feel about having the galaxy's first diplomatic emotional support companion? I imagine there are quite a few tense negotiations that could benefit from the presence of someone who specializes in helping others feel understood and valued. The creature's rumbling purr intensified, suggesting that career counseling was being received with enthusiasm. Around the arena, alien minds continued their frantic recalibration of reality, while recording devices captured footage that would undoubtedly become required viewing in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. The human collective, the minister said slowly, his multiple eyes focusing on the trade agreements with newfound respect, has just demonstrated a form of strength we never considered measuring. You have transformed our most feared trial into our most valued teacher, our weapon into our counselor, our test into our revelation. Standard human procedure, the diplomat replied with the casual confidence of someone who had just rewritten the rules of interstellar relations during her lunch break. We have a saying, the best way to defeat an enemy is to make them your friend. Remarkably effective, though it does require actually listening to what others need rather than simply assuming they need to be conquered. And so it was that the Zalithian Empire's grand diplomatic arena became the birthplace of a new era in interstellar relations, where strength was measured not by the ability to survive trials, but by the wisdom to recognize that some trials were never meant to be survived. They were meant to be understood. The galaxy's most feared diplomatic tradition had been transformed into its most valued counseling service. Bureaucratic paperwork had achieved new levels of complexity, and somewhere in the depths of space, other species began to reconsider their own assumptions about the nature of power, diplomacy, and the peculiar ability of humans to find friends in the most unlikely places. The trade agreements, incidentally, were signed that very afternoon, with the galaxy's newest diplomatic counselor serving as witness, a detail that would require footnotes in 17 different languages, and probably spawn at least 3 new academic disciplines devoted to the study of interspecies emotional intelligence. The universe, it seemed, had developed a fondness for happy endings, even when they arrived through the most bureaucratically complicated route imaginable. Optimistic, chittered a delegate whose species seemed to consist primarily of tentacles and poor judgment. These mammals are notoriously fragile. I predict 30 seconds maximum. Meanwhile, the human diplomat stood in the center of the arena, apparently oblivious to the betting pool forming around her life expectancy. She had removed her diplomatic jacket and rolled up her sleeves with the methodical precision of someone preparing for routine office work, rather than mortal combat. Her briefcase sat nearby, its contents presumably useless against 12 feet of murderous alien predator. The beast circled her with the patient stalking behavior of a creature that had learned to savor the fear of its prey. Each step was deliberately placed, designed to create maximum psychological impact as claws scraped against stone and muscles bunched with barely contained violence. The diplomatic overhead lighting caught the creature's scales, creating a light show that was both beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Notice how it's testing her reactions. The minister provided commentary with the enthusiasm of a nature documentary narrator. The Ravager Beast is not merely a killing machine, it's a psychological warfare specialist. It feeds on fear as much as flesh, and the terror of its victims often proves more satisfying than the actual consumption. The human diplomat, however, seemed remarkably unimpressed by this psychological warfare. She stood perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled, watching the creature's movements with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly interesting weather pattern. Her complete lack of visible terror appeared to confuse the beast, which paused in its circling to regard her with what might have been puzzlement. "Curious," muttered the Corthanian representative. "Why isn't it attacking? The creature should have struck by now." "Perhaps it's savoring the moment," suggested another alien, though uncertainty crept into its voice, building suspense before the inevitable carnage. The beast's 6 eyes focused on the human with laser intensity, and for a moment, the arena fell silent except for the sound of its breathing, a sound like wind through a cave system lined with grinding stone. The creature's nostrils flared as it processed scents that apparently provided information beyond the comprehension of the watching aliens. Then, with a roar that shook dust from the arena's ancient rafters, the Ravager Beast launched itself forward. The attack came with the explosive force of a natural disaster given teeth and claws. The creature's massive form hurtled across the arena floor like a missile with anger management issues. Its multiple eyes locked onto the human target with absolute predatory focus. Claws extended, muscles coiled, and jaws open to reveal a dental arrangement that suggested evolution had been taking notes from particularly creative nightmares. The alien audience erupted in cheers and commentary, recording devices whirring to capture what promised to be a spectacular if brief diplomatic conclusion. Betting pools reached their climax as the beast's massive form blotted out the artificial lighting, casting a shadow over the human diplomat that seemed to stretch toward inevitability itself. "Magnificent form," the minister's voice carried over the chaos. "Notice the perfect trajectory, the calculated approach. This is why the Ravager Beast has never failed to deliver results." The creature's claws struck the polished floor where the human diplomat had been standing, sending sparks flying as they carved gouges in the supposedly indestructible surface. The impact resonated through the arena like a thunderclap, while the beast's momentum carried it forward in a display of barely controlled violence that left the watching aliens breathless with appreciation. But something was wrong. The expected screaming had not materialized. The anticipated sounds of diplomatic conclusion through violent means had failed to manifest. Instead, an unusual silence had fallen over the arena, broken only by the beast's heavy breathing, and the confused murmuring of spectators who had clearly expected a different sort of entertainment. The human diplomat stood exactly where she had been moments before, apparently unharmed and displaying the same calm expression she had worn throughout the entire proceeding. The Ravager Beast, meanwhile, had somehow managed to stop its charge mere inches from its target, and was now regarding her with an expression that suggested profound confusion about the fundamental nature of reality itself. The minister's voice trailed off, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence as if trying to process information that didn't fit any known diplomatic protocol. What just happened? The silence that followed defied every natural law of dramatic tension the universe had spent billions of years perfecting. Here stood a creature specifically engineered by evolution's most vindictive committee, mere inches from a human diplomat who should have been converted into a diplomatic footnote by now, yet somehow both remained perfectly intact and apparently engaged in what could only be described as a staring contest. The Ravager Beast's 6 eyes focused on the human with an intensity that suggested it was experiencing the philosophical equivalent of a system crash. Its massive head tilted to one side, then the other, as if trying to process information that didn't match any of its instinctual programming. The creature's breathing had shifted from the aggressive huffing of a predator to something that sounded almost curious. "This is highly irregular." The minister's voice carried the strained tone of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled by empirical evidence. "The beast should have... There should be more. Where are the dramatic sound effects?" The human diplomat remained perfectly still, her gaze locked with the creature's in what appeared to be some form of interspecies communication that bypassed every known diplomatic protocol. She had not moved, had not spoken, had not even flinched when 12 feet of armored death had hurled itself toward her with homicidal intent. Instead, she simply stood there, breathing steadily, as if facing down legendary predators was merely another item on her daily agenda. "Perhaps it's malfunctioning," suggested the Corthanian representative, though its mandibles clicked nervously. "These biological weapons can be unreliable. Maybe it needs a software update." "The Ravager Beast doesn't run on software," the minister replied with the exasperation of someone explaining basic facts to particularly dense children. "It runs on pure instinct and dietary requirements. It doesn't malfunction, it simply kills things and then moves on to kill other things. This is literally its only job description." Yet the creature showed no signs of resuming its appointed duties. Instead, it lowered its massive head toward the human, nostrils flaring as it investigated scents that apparently provided information beyond the comprehension of the watching alien. The beast's aggressive posture gradually relaxed, muscles uncoiling from their attack-ready tension into something that almost resembled curiosity. The human diplomat extended one hand, slowly and deliberately, palm up in a gesture that somehow transcended species barrier. The movement was so gradual, so non-threatening, that it barely registered as motion at all. Yet the beast's eyes tracked every millimeter of progress with the focused attention of a creature encountering something entirely outside its experience. "What is she doing?" whispered an alien delegate, whose species consisted primarily of nervous energy and poor decision-making skills. "Is this some sort of human combat technique? Are we witnessing advanced martial art?" The truth, as it often did in diplomatic situations, proved far more mundane and simultaneously more extraordinary than anyone had anticipated. The human diplomat was not employing ancient fighting techniques or mysterious human technology. She was simply recognizing something that every observer had missed in their excitement about impending violence. The creature before her was not a mindless killing machine, but a sentient being with its own complex emotional landscape. The beast's massive head moved closer to the extended hand, and for a moment that stretched like taffy in a temporal anomaly, predator and prey existed in perfect stillness. The alien audience held its collective breath, recording devices humming with anticipation, while the universe itself seemed to pause for what promised to be either a remarkable breakthrough or a spectacular failure of human judgment. Then, with a gentleness that defied every expectation and several laws of physics, the Ravager Beast pressed its armored snout against the human's palm. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds the fundamental nature of reality shifted in ways that would require extensive paperwork to properly document. The creature's eyes, all 6 of them, fixed on the human with an expression that could only be described as recognition, not of a threat to be eliminated, but of something far more complex and unprecedented. "Impossible," breathed the minister, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence as if trying to reset his visual processing systems. "The beast doesn't. It's never. This violates every known behavioral pattern in our database." The human diplomat's hand moved slowly along the creature's snout, fingers tracing the ridged armor plating with the confident touch of someone who understood that beneath all that evolutionary weaponry lay a mind capable of making choices. The beast's rumbling growl shifted to something that sounded almost like a purr, if purring could be performed by a creature whose vocal cords had been tuned by geological processes. "She's not fighting it," observed the Corthanian representative, mandibles clicking in bewilderment. "She's communicating with it, but that's impossible. The Ravager Beast doesn't communicate, it eliminates diplomatic problems through direct action." The impossible became routine as the creature lowered itself to the arena floor, its massive form settling into a position that could only be described as relaxed. The human diplomat stepped closer, her movements still slow and deliberate, as if she were approaching a particularly large and dangerous pet, rather than a legendary instrument of diplomatic persuasion.